and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Erik.
Thanks, Carol. Much appreciated. So, hello and welcome everyone in this interesting webcast on this nice, well, for me it's a Friday evening. I don't know what time or where you are currently located. First of all, I'd like to, as I already mentioned, thank everyone for being here. I'm guessing this is probably not a very simple time for anyone. We're all probably pretty busy handling both professional and personal things. So I do appreciate taking a bit of time to come and have a look at what we're about to say. Normally we would have had this webcast last week, so my apologies for the rescheduled there. But things got a bit challenging when we were moving our Paris event to Brussels, and I had to basically make sure that I got home in time to be able to run the class remotely in our VLive setup. It went great, but it required a bit of personal planning on my side, hence the delay. That being said, thank you for joining, and let's dive into it. First of all, just a small note, who am I? Some of you may have been in previous webcasts that I've done or even taken a class of me. I'm Erik Van Buggenhout. I do a lot of things for SANS. Some of the things I do is looking after the 599 course and the 699 course. The 699 course had the first beta public soon. We have a second beta lined up, which is going to be virtual, as all of the events are at the moment, end of April, and it's going to be in the first live production event is currently scheduled to be in July in Berlin. So that's going to be very interesting. I would love to see you, of course, in any of those courses. Those courses typically handle purple teaming, 599 having a bit more of a focus on everything which is defenses. So we look at attack strategies and how we could possibly implement defenses. We discuss TheHive in there as well, albeit shortly. So that's why I wanted to take a bit more time to talk about this amazing platform and to share some ideas. Because at our company, and that's of course the second thing that I do, at Enviso, I look after a lot of our technical services, including threat hunting and adversary emulation. Part of that also involves me talking to the guys in our SOC, and we're very big users and very big fans of TheHive, if you will. So that's why I had the inspiration of doing this webcast. Now they always say that you should always start with a small joke, and it's always tricky because I don't see, of course, the feedback of people, but I'll go for it anyway. So what clothing brand does a hacktivist wear? So a hacktivist, they've told me that they typically wear Adidas. Just have to clarify the joke. It's a reference to the clothing brand Adidas, right? So Adidas. There you go. Amazing joke. Most importantly, though, because it's nice to be talking about TheHive, and I do want to put this very clearly out there. I'm currently not an active developer in TheHive. I only use it at the moment. I'm a very big fan. It works really well. So I do want to introduce these people. They're actually on the public website, of course, of TheHive. So that's also why I just cut out their views. Nabil, Thomasat, and here we have Jerome, Danny, and Niels. They're actually the 6 main guys behind TheHive, and they do all of the work, if you will. So if you like the platform, then that's very much thanks to them, because they are the people who are putting in the time and the effort to maintain it. Because TheHive is, of course, an open source project, so it's something that's free, being maintained as a community effort, if you will. So that does mean that well, they have to, of course, find the motivation to do these things, and I'm very grateful for that. I also think TheHive is one of those interesting platforms which is at the level of, for example, MISP, the Malware Information Sharing Platform, where we actually look at open source platforms which have risen to being enterprise grade and being used by many different organizations around the world. So what is TheHive? In a few words, it's an open source instant response framework that is focused on 3 big pillars. It's collaboration, elaboration, analysis. Now I'll go, of course, a lot more in depth on all of these different topics, but the goal of TheHive is to become a central platform that can be used by both SOC and CERT analysts to work together, to analyze, to keep track of what they're doing, to have tasks and playbooks so that they know, okay, how do we handle a certain case, and of course, who is picking up certain cases and alerts. It allows the creation of flows, so where you can specify, for example, a playbook of what activities need to happen if a certain case occurs. Templates are very big as well. So what you see there is that you have a lot of opportunities to standardize your documentation, your workflows, your processes, if you will, which makes it a very interesting tool. How we use it internally is in our SOC. We use TheHive as the main tool to alert and to follow up on cases and tasks, and that works really well. We also abuse it a bit. That's the second use case, which I'm a bit embarrassed to talk about, but why not? When we are doing purple teaming, the idea is that we've actually built up an entire setup where we use Caldera for adversary emulation. We use a stack with Elastic typically to get in the logs and to review what we're seeing. We also use TheHive to get in the alerts there, so we can then fine-tune the entire detection stack. So we have everything up and running, so we can go from actual emulation up until seeing the alert being created in TheHive. And then we use Caldera also to look at the results, so we can provide a decent MITRE ATT&CK overview of what's being covered currently with the rules. So that's another way. So there's many creative uses, of course. Even the 699 CTF, so the SEC 699 CTF, I actually abuse TheHive as well. Why? Because I have alerts which are being I have an I have a backdoor that's available on systems, and of course, as a student, you have to put the backdoor there if you are the attacking team. And while your backdoor is installed, it's basically sending input to TheHive to do some scoring. Next to that, in TheHive, another thing there is I have Sigma alerting going on. Which is being put in place by the students. And when it's a false positive, I can actually use a Cortex responder to say that's a false positive. And that way they don't get points. If they have a valid hit, so if I determine that it's a true positive, they get points. So many different ways of using TheHive and Cortex, but just that's an important remark. This is, of course, the big goal of it is to be used as an enterprise platform. Has a lot of integration with other tools, for example, MISP, which is the Malware Information Sharing Platform, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, where we can keep track of indicators of compromise, intelligence, so threat intel, where you can get that visibility. Now, TheHive has two-directional communication, if you will. It can either read information from MISP, but it can also put information into MISP. So if the result of one of your analysis turns into new IOCs or new information or even enrichment, you can of course also do that with TheHive. So what does it look like? Here you can see, for example, a case that was generated where we see a spear phishing mail being sent to the CEO. We have a number of observables that can be analyzed. We have tasks that can be assigned to analysts. So you can have all of your different analysts should, of course, have a profile in TheHive. So you can assign tasks to the different analysts. You can also have tasks to be picked up by analysts. So an analyst can look at the overall task view and say, look, I want to pick up that specific task, after which it then becomes part of their workflow. You have custom tags there. My apologies, that should be tags instead of tasks. So we can see, for example, there again, everyone maps to MITRE ATT&CK, but here you can see it as well. We can map the case in this case. The case in this case, see what I did there. We can map it to MITRE ATT&CK with T1192, which is a spear phishing attempt. So that's a nice way of also doing this. Now, if you do it correctly, those tags can also be used to do reporting upon, which again is nice because TheHive can be used to extract reports, dashboards to get visibility and some nice graphs to report on your status. So if you then look at those tasks, for example, here we can see that we have a number of tasks available. They're part of an investigation. For example, if a spear phishing mail is sent to the CEO, here are a couple of tasks that would need to be performed. For example, opening the attachment or the URL in a sandbox, retrieving the full phishing mail. You can assign people to that. The basics. I'll go a lot deeper once we get the environment live, when we dive into the live environment. Now, what are the main components of TheHive and Cortex? TheHive is the central case management platform. So it's there that you typically have your input of information. What do you use to feed information into TheHive? It can be your SIEM, can be a QRadar, can be an Elasticstack, Splunk. There's quite a variety of different integrations already. You can just use the TheHive API. They have a Python client for it as well, which allows you to easily interact with TheHive and to upload information into the system. So many ways of doing this. The idea is you feed information into TheHive, and from there everything starts moving. That's where the magic happens. Now, TheHive very closely integrates with Cortex, which is being developed by the same 6 people. In Cortex, what we use is analyzers and responders. Now, analyzers are, of course, scripts, if you will, that will further analyze certain information. For example, a case can have a number of observables. For example, IP addresses can be, well, a wide variety of things. Can be hashes, can be files. What you can do with an analyzer is then analyze those observables and provide feedback into TheHive. This will allow you to automate a big part of the analysis work. If the analyst would normally have to do, let's say, something very foolish and simple, do a geo IP lookup of a certain IP address to get some more information, or to check it in a number of blacklists or against a couple of threat intel sources. That's something that you would typically automate with Cortex to make sure that the analyst immediately has that view and that observable immediately has some more context around it. The other part is responders. So that's the other side of automation, if you will. There we can look at doing some automated response, which sounds very fancy, but there we can look at different tasks that you can set up. For example, you could choose to, if a certain IP address is determined to be malicious, to automatically add that IP address to one of your blocking lists. Stuff like that would be a typical responder. MISP is, of course, it's not really part of TheHive and Cortex, but it's closely integrated because they get along fine, those projects, if you will. So what you'll see is that that can be used to centrally store and use threat intel. Now, if you look at the overall overview of the diagram, this is actually a diagram that the people of TheHive Cortex made themselves. So what do we see here? Here you can see the different icons in action. You can see TheHive being fed by your different feeders, if you will, where you have SIEM alerts. You have custom alert feeders in there, so that even email reports can be used to integrate information into TheHive. And then you can see the Cortex, which is the small little brainy icon, if you will, where you have responders, analyzers. Note also, of course, that you can have both commercial, well, if you will, analyzers which require a commercial subscription, if you will, or an external service. Those things do exist, or you can have internal responders as well. There you can see, for example, the difference with the blue and the red. In the blue, you have the typical internal responders, such as sending a mail, blocking and let's say URL even in the proxy, and so on. Sorry, that was a responder, my bad. I'm bad terminology. It's been a long day. But so you can see here the point. The whole diagram illustrates how all of those components work together. At the top, of course, you have the different MISP instances that you can connect with. Note that you can have different ones, and then you can share information further from that. Note as well, and that's important to remark, that the arrows towards MISP are bidirectional. So there you can see the idea of being able to both read and write information into MISP. So it's pretty close integration there. So what happens when a case comes in? You have a case in TheHive. Now, a case is typically built using a case template. Now, that case template can be predefined, so you can have different types of cases. For example, a phishing mail would be a type of a case. Now, that would mean that most likely when you receive a phishing mail, there's going to be a number of different tasks that you do for analysis. Well, because it's a standard way of doing things. I hope your analysts all have the same methodology of working. So that means you can create a case template to be able to do that, to be able to say, okay, look, we're going to be, if we analyze a phishing mail, these are the different steps that we take. So you can create that up front. So whenever such a case gets created, you will automatically have a case which is created according to all the different steps. It has all the different tasks available. You have different observables that get added, which can then be analyzed, of course, and can be reported upon. Now, if you then look at your Cortex analyzers and responders, that's the bottom part of it, as we already mentioned. Just want to give you a couple of very concrete examples of analyzers. You can even use MISP as an analyzer, because you can do a lookup, for example, to make sure, okay, is this IP address already known in my MISP instance, for example, or this hash? You can even run Yarrow rules. If you have a sample, you can even run Yarrow rules against that. Note that all of these analyzers, they're not all built by the people who built Cortex and TheHive. So there's a very lively community of people who are building their own analyzers and who are adding responders. Some people in our team have been working on that as well. We actually wrote a blog post with an entire description of how to write responders, which is fairly interesting. I'll show it as well, probably near the end of this webcast as well. Now, as we mentioned, the responder takes JSON input and does an action and can report on the result of that action. So the idea of a responder is to do something, right? The analyzer is more to get additional information. The responder is meant to do something. One nice example of this is the first line, and that's actually something that we picked up as an example or a challenge that we wanted to do. We want to build a phishing responder, if you will, to be able to send feedback to users when they forward, for example, a phishing mail. The idea is that we have people at some of our customers who report phishing mails, but the less feedback that people get, the less likely they are to keep on forwarding those phishing mails. Because if you never provide a response, that might kind of annoy them. It's like a black hole where they send stuff into, but they never hear from that. Now what you can do with this setup is write a Cortex responder where, based upon the result of the analysis, whether it's malicious or not, you actually provide feedback to the user. And that can be a very simple responder, as we'll see, because we can then send feedback to the user to inform him or her of the fact that the mail that was forwarded was indeed phishing or was actually benign. We can do automatic ticket creation in the local IT help desk solution, of course, because you want to make certain changes. You can update block lists based on network IOCs, and so on and so on and so on. Again, this is limited to your imagination, if you will. So this makes the Hive Cortex closer to a SORT tool, like a security orchestration automated response tool, which I find it's of course happening these days. You can see more and more of the products going in that direction, and it makes a lot of sense because what we want to do, of course, is automate a lot of the menial tasks that a lot of our analysts are working on to make sure that they can actually spend their time and effort on the more interesting things, the things that really require them to think and to assess. So this is, I think, a very big part. This is automation and making sure that you can you facilitate those things. As we mentioned, we can also pull MISP events. We can use them. We can even pull information from MISP as alerts. We can see if that MISP information actually is relevant for us. We can then add tasks, if we will, and then we can even put it back. So you can even use that to further enrich information, which is fairly interesting. Now, a note on the overall architecture, and I'm going to do a pretty big demo after this. Don't worry about all the slides. I'm going to almost shut up and start doing practical things. But here we can see the overall architecture of the V3 of the Hive. A big note here to make is that the Hive is currently moving towards version 4. They're currently pushing the Hive for release candidate 1. Just one remark there, it's not fully cleared for production yet, but they do encourage people to use it and to test and to provide feedback. This is the V3 architecture where you can see the Hive and Cortex, so the two big parts. Note that at the bottom you will see that a lot of the base, it's based on Elasticsearch for storage. And this is one of the big things that they've actually changed. Note that this entire stack and how they see things and how they're building it, it's described in an amazing presentation by Sadi Kadi, which is very nice. It was done at Lisbon, at B-Sides Lisbon. So you see that there's a pretty nice presentation about all the different components, how they fit together, and how it was set up. Definitely must read to have a quick look at that one. So if you look at version 4, this is actually brand new, was only published. They've been working on it for quite a while, only published early March, so this month actually. And what they've done actually is they've added a lot of enterprise features. For example, multi-tenancy is something that they've introduced. They have two-factor authentication. They have RBAC in there as well. So there's a lot of different additions at two-factor authentication, of course. It's a pretty nice one, especially when you want to use this as your central platform to do case management, to do instant response. But so that meant that they had to adapt the storage engine that they were using. And so now everything is built on Apache Cassandra, which is a pretty big change as well. Do note that this is currently available as the release candidate 1, but they're still supporting version 3 until further notice as well. For most likely, I think the current setup is 2 years that they will still support version 3, unless, of course, Elastic decides to unless they have to basically move to Elastic 7 because V3 uses Elastic 6, which works well, Elasticsearch 6. But if they would have to change to version 7, it would be a bit too much of an effort to rewrite the entire V3 because V4 is available. So if you're still using the third version, there's no rush to immediately move, but just know that this is the new version, this is the new ID, which makes a lot of sense because it makes it indeed a lot more enterprise ready. So a couple of ideas on how can this help your teams. Well, of course, central repository and dashboard for handling, for alert handling in cases. Automation, I think that's a big one. You want to automate part of the analysis and the response. Again, use your people for what they're good at, and to organize analyst tasks, playbooks, make sure that they are doing the right things and according to the right structure. You can then pull out reports. For example, here we can see that this is an example of some pie charts that we created, management loves pie charts, of course. You can see here, for example, the results of phishing feedbacks. So you can get the statistic on, okay, but if we look at all of the feedbacks that are being sent or the phishing mails that we receive, what is actually the result of that? How many are truly phishing? How many are spam? And how many are just legitimate emails which were wrongly reported? Because that helps us, because it also tells us how well our users are doing and what the use is of the forwarding. We have case tags. For example, we have view on MITRE attack techniques. So you can see, okay, how many cases do we have which refer to certain attack techniques? Because that might mean that we have to make some improvements there, implement some security controls, and so on. You even have views on the amount of cases being handled by what people, so you can see the productivity of your analysts, if you will. So let's look at the platform, because I want to spend quite a bit more time on the platform and just look at it a bit more to see how everything works. So let me just change my viewing screen here. I have to be careful. If you have questions, by the way, just a small note, we will have some time most likely near the end of the webcast to talk a bit more about, to answer to your questions. Oh, there we go. So what I've done here, I've actually set up a small TheHive stack, TheHive Cortex. This is version 3.4. The reason why I'm using this one is because if you haven't used TheHive before, version 4 includes a bit more complexity, and it's still not in production. So that's why I want to use the version that they currently offer, if you will, and that's currently stable. So what do we see here? We see some information here. So this is the home screen after authentication. We can see that there are a few cases open which have a severity, a number of observables, and we have someone who is assigned to that. Now, I'm the administrator, so I'm a user in this platform, so they are assigned to me. So you can see that they are indeed cases that I have here. So what do we see here? If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see some information about the version that you're running. And here on the right, the bottom right side, you can actually see that you have an integration to Cortex, which is currently enabled. So I have a valid connectivity with Cortex to use the analyzers and the responders. Also note that you would typically have a MISP instance deployed here as well. I felt a bit uncomfortable coupling this to our production MISP, so I didn't do it. So that's why I don't have an integration with MISP in this test or demo setup. But still, don't worry, it's going to allow me to show most of the features anyhow. So here we go. So if you then look at the case, for example, here we can see a phishing report, all of the different information. We get information about the TLP that was added to it, so the traffic light protocol. We have all of the different tags. We have a number of responder jobs which actually ran, which I'll talk a bit more about in just a second. You can see some of my test runs here as well. We see the related cases, which is interesting because it allows us to actually compare cases which are sharing observables. And this is pretty nice because that allows us to get a view and to basically make a link or make a connection between different cases. So if we go into my tasks, so as a user, as an analyst, you also have a number of tasks which you can immediately see. Here you can see that I have 2 tasks which are currently assigned to me. I have to determine a target and I have to investigate beaconing domain names. Apparently, these are all related to this interesting case, which is beaconing detected to a certain IP address image cursor.png. So already as an analyst, I can see and I can note, okay, this is what I need to do. This is the activities that are expected of me. So there's a number of other tasks here as well, which currently are not assigned to anyone. As an analyst, you can pick them up, however. So you could say, look, I want to pick these up. The severity, of course, can be used for prioritization and to make sure that you you prioritize the right things, basically. That makes a lot of sense. Now, note that how do these alerts end up here? Because if you go here into the alerts, you'll see that there are, because we saw tasks, the tasks assigned to me, the waiting tasks. If you look at alerts, this is where the input basically comes in. So this is where the Hive receives its information. And from here, you would typically convert an alert into a case to start working on it. Now, how does the Hive get its input? Well, I showed that already on the input there on the slides. There are a number of ways. For example, you could have an input from a SIEM which is sending through alerts, which you can then use to create a case. So you could even have a custom API that you can even have a custom client that uses the Hive API to create the alerts. Many different options are available. So you see those here, and you can start running with these. Now, if we go into the dashboard view, this is, of course, if you want to get some information about your cases, this is really the reporting stuff, right? So this is actually some of the pie charts that I showed on the slide, so you can see, get that visibility. That's what management likes. So that's, of course, what you want to use. Some statistics on alerts, even the waiting alerts, which still need to be assessed to see if we convert them to cases or not, and so on. Now, let's have a quick look at the admin menu, because I'm an administrator, so I can actually manage this entire instance. Some of the things that I can do is, for example, looking at case templates. So this is, as I mentioned, a part of structuring your workflow. And here we can see, for example, that one of the case templates that's in here is beaconing detected. So what does that allow me to do? Well, this allows me to structure how should we do a certain, or how should we handle a certain case, and how should we take care of the case, if you will. How do we make sure that we follow the right steps and we have a structured way of dealing with these things? So this is preparation, of course, and you want to add as many case templates as you can. You want to make sure that for most of the cases and for most of the alerts that you're getting in, you have a way of dealing with these. What you can also do, and I'm just seeing here, you can add metrics to case templates as well. So you can even specify here, for example, do you want to add certain metrics in here which are very specific? I have a custom one here which is called the number of C2 calls, which could be interesting because we're dealing with beaconing here. So that could be something that I want to definitely have in there. So I want to have a metric on how many instances of C2 communications did I actually see. You can also edit those specific tasks, and you can just add some more information, a description. You can even add a default assignee to that. Johnny the analyst is ready for action. So depending on even the type of task, or if you have a certain expertise of your people in the SOC, you can also determine who needs to handle what kind of tasks, if you will, which makes a lot of sense. I'm going to say that quite a few times. You can import templates, so you can share templates between different organizations, which is nice. So that helps you share the love, if you will, and keep on improving on this. That is, of course, the goal. Now, if we go into observables, let me see. Where was I? That's perfect. Let me just keep this here. We go back to my different observables. You can see the different types of observables that you have available. So the reporting template, I'll get back to that later. But so the case template is, of course, everything which is how do you structure a certain case when it comes in. If you look at the observables, we can actually start looking at all the different data types. So you can see that you have URLs, user agents, mails, IP addresses, URL pods. It's pretty broad, right? The whole point is there that you can have different kinds, and of course, those observables. That's your link towards Cortex, because the Cortex analyzers, they work with certain observables. They are meant to take in as input some of those observable types, and so they can then, of course, start analyzing them and providing additional feedback onto them. So that brings me to Cortex, right? The brain, if you will, of this entire setup. So I'm just going to my next tab here, where I have my Cortex engine running. Now, Cortex is, of course, the part where we look at, I sometimes call it the brain of the Hive, if you will. This is where we can start doing some smart automation and where we can start building additional logic. So what do we see here? When we go into the homepage of Cortex, we actually get dropped onto the different jobs. So we can see everything that it's been running, and we can see everything that it's been doing. So if we go here, for example, there's been a phishing report by the Hive. Let's have a quick look. So we can see all of the information. We get the full input, the JSON input. We see exactly what was sent. and we can also see the report that was provided back. So we can see here, for example, this is one of our custom reporters to provide feedback on a phishing mail, and you can see that we've actually provided feedback to, hey, look, you've recently reported a spear phishing attempt, blah, 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 the entire thing, but you can see that in there. Let's have a look at some of the analyzers here, though. So that was jobs. So that's actually what's going on. Can be very useful for troubleshooting and to review, okay, what's going on here and how should we deal with this. When we look at analyzers, here is where we have quite a number of stuff built in already. But again, you can add your own. So what type of analyzers do you see here? You've got the cybercrime tracker, D-Shield lookups. That's of course SANS related. There's stuff here developed by Erik Capuano even here, so a nice shout out to another SANS instructor to get the categorization of a URL using FortiGuard, which is nice. You have URL scan for some analysis of URLs that you can submit. So that's again pretty nice to see how all of these analyzers exist and how they can be useful. So you could walk through these. You can create your own as well, of course, which I'll get back to later on. Now, when you're creating or developing your own, you're typically also going to be dealing with some command line stuff. So you'll have to use an editor and actually work with that, which is which is interesting. Note that we are currently in the analyzers. We only use all of the ones which are free. So that's just a small remark to make, that you can adapt that, of course, right? You can also use paid ones. So if you go here in organization, for example, look at all of the analyzers. There's about 117 in them. So these are all of the different analyzers which are available. So you can enable them, disable them. Some of these are of course commercial because you have to provide API keys, for example. But there's a whole ton of them, which is pretty nice. Right. So then looking at some responders, here we can see that there's the fish feedback in there, which is Tom Asselman is one of the guys who actually works in our team. So he developed this one, which we'll talk about a bit later. But here we can even see submitting observables to the CrowdStrike Falcon Custom IOC API. That's an interesting one that's also added as a responder. So there's a mailer one. Basically, it's just going to forward information from a TheHive case or alert to an email, which is pretty straightforward. Now, you can also add proxies in here. So if you would want to set that up on connectivity, that's something that you can very simply do. Now let's look at a practical case, right? Let's look at an alert. So I'm going back to my TheHive stack here. If we look at all of the different alerts, let's take a phishing report here, and let's have a look at how that one works. So if we open the alerts, so this is what actually came into TheHive. So what do we see here? We see a small description. User has reported a phishing mail. And what are the observables that are in there? There seems to be a URL which is pointing towards an executable. There's an EML file, that's the entire email. And there is, of course, the email address of the reporting user. And now you can see that there are a number of similar cases which are being, again, here pushed, saying, look, this is what it's going to look like if you import this as a case. This is what you're going to get. You will have all of these phishing reports, which are very similar. Now they match for 100%. This is because I was putting in some demo data. Now, why do you have this matching algorithm here, or why does it tell you how much matching you have with existing cases? Well, the goal, of course, is if you receive 20 or 30 different, let's say your organization gets phished and you've got 1,000 users which all get the same phishing mail, then that's probably one case that you want to handle and not 1,000. So you can easily merge them together, which is supported, because that allows you also to make sure that your statistics are okay and you're not doing how would I put it? You're not ruining your statistics because of one big phishing campaign. So let's import this alert. Let's make sure that we can open this up. So that's going to start running for a while. Look, there we go. So now we have a case which has been created. So this is case 11, a phishing mail. And then we can start looking at, okay, but what does that mean for us? So what do we have here? So we have a number of different details, which are, of course, purely extracted from the alerts. Let's have a look at the different tasks. So it seems that we don't have tasks here. So that means that we don't have a specific template for this type of attack yet. So we don't have a phishing reporting template, which could be something that we can add. So you can add your own tasks, of course, for this. And you can then, of course, look at the different observables, right? Now, if you see these observables, one of the things that we could do is look into this a bit more. Sorry, one sec. I was just. Sorry, I just saw something flying by here. So we can have a look at this and let's see. Okay, this email.eml. What can we do with this one? So we have the full email which is available. Zip. So this is an entire mail that we can extract, and we should be able to now send it into our responder. Let me just have a very quick look. I'm just going, of course, live demo. So far for the sacrifice, let me just check my responder here. That makes sense. Just want to see why my email file doesn't see this as an why it's not allowing me to submit that to one of my responders. Interesting. Let me just try the URL one. So I do have this responder here. Okay, it's going to require a bit of troubleshooting from my side. No worries. Carrying on, we can walk through this. So what we typically would do is now, of course, have these observables be automatically fed into my Cortex stack to be able to analyze them. What I can do, however, and this one seems to work, so it's interesting. One of my my analyzer, I think they're not correctly enabled in my TheHive in my Cortex stack, but I'll look into it in a second. We can actually use a responder here to actually say, look, I want to provide feedback though to one of my users. So this is a responder that does work, where I could say, look, I've just looked at this in a real life scenario. Of course, if you're stuck like this as an analyst, you get along to do your manual analysis. Let's imagine that you've reviewed these and you say, look, it does look pretty suspicious. So I can provide some feedback. And I want to, wait a second. Of course, here they are. Okay, this wants to work. Sorry, my bad. Small mistake here. So I did manage to, it does make sense that the responders here aren't available because I was actually clicking the wrong button. More on Erik. So here my analyzers are. So actually, if I submit them here, I do get them kicked off. So here, for example, I've submitted my different ones into the into Cortex to get them analyzed. I was actually looking at the responder when I was looking for an analysis, which is a little bit weird. So there we go. So I have my EML parser, which has now been submitted. So it's going to try to parse the EML out and get additional information from that email file, which is pretty nice. Let's have a look. Going back to my tasks, so we can see the phishing report. So again, you can submit all of these if you would like, and then you can see here, of course, that if you go into your jobs history, you can actually see them coming in. So you can actually see that the analysis is taking place and that it's successfully analyzing all of these different events or these observables. So for example, here we see the EML file coming in And the report that actually comes back has all the different details. So it parses through the EML and it provides that feedback back into your stack, which is pretty useful because it does allow you to then get visibility. Now, with all of these observables, you can see here, for example, that you're getting information back. So here, for example, email parse is telling me, look, this email doesn't have any attachments. We can see here as well, for example, that my domain name here, it doesn't match any known C2 servers. So I get 0 hits on that. So you can see that that's the contextualization that you're getting. So you're getting all that feedback, which is useful when you want to make a certain call, right? So you can get visibility on, okay, what's happening here and what do we see? And now if you would then want to provide feedback to an end user, one of the things that you could do is just use the responder to actually say, look, I want to provide some feedback and make a call and say, look, yes, I want to provide feedback to an end user and tell him whether or not it was a malicious mail or not, yes or no. We could also just download the entire thing, so we can just grab the raw feedback or the raw email from there as well. We just use the malware as a password, which allows us to review and of course to do some more manual analysis. Now, of course, here you can also, because I'm just using the automated features here, but the whole idea of TheHive is that you can also use your own, right? You can add your own information to it, so you can add additional info, you can adapt, and you can further look, okay, is there anything else that I would want to add? Are there any other even observables that I would want to add? Things that I found manually that I want to add into the system as well. Those observables you can then again run against all of your analyzers and your responders that you have in Cortex. So the idea is always that you add information into TheHive. So you put everything together in cases which you can easily report on. But by doing that, you also make sure that you get visibility, and you can just always use the same streamlined processes because you can submit information into the Hive, get them into Cortex, and then you can work with that. There we go. Let's have a look. So let's assume that in Cortex here, you have different, well, responders, let's say analyzers, and you would want to develop your own, right? Maybe you want to add your own responders to this because you want to start looking into adding your own insights or writing your own analyzer. For example, here, if you have you can have a very quick look at the Census, for example, which is a tool which you can use to just do lookups, if you will. So this will, of course, use Census to provide an IP address, get visibility on typically open ports. Now, what if you would want to write your own responders? This is something that you'll have to do. Most of it is in the command line, because what you can do here in responders, you can just specify some parameters which are predefined. For example, you can add some proxy configuration. That's just for your global config. But you could specify API keys in here, for example. For fish feedback, what you'll typically have is SMTP configuration. But what if you want to write your own? Right? If you want to build your own responder from scratch, what you'll have to do is actually do that from the command line. So let me just swap over here for a second and show you my terminal screen here. So this is the stack that I'm using, where I'm running my Cortex Analyzer, and I'm having a look at my responder. So if you go in here in the responder, you have all the different ones available. I could just select, for example, my fish feedback. And I could then, you can see that there's two files here. There's a small JSON file which just has all of the config. So this is, of course, the configuration that you can see in the Hive as well. So it provides different fields you want to complete, default values, all of that stuff. But you can also have a look at the actual Python code that we're using to do the work, right? So this is just pretty simple Python, if you will, where we're, of course, using our configuration values that we've set to connect to the SMTP server. And then we're just creating we're creating a mail to provide feedback. Now, do note that we are getting information here to see if is it phishing, is it legitimate mail, or is it spam? And we use that, of course, to send out our feedback, if you will. So that's a very simple responder that we've added here to be able to do this. Now, if you would want to write your own responders, this can sometimes be a bit more complicated as it seems, because that part looks pretty straightforward, right? What we saw there was just very simple. How can we write a piece of Python code, if you will, to be able to do that and to be able to send the right feedback to end users? There is an entire documentation that we've written. I'm a bit I'm a bit under the weather today with my words. Jesus Christ. By Tom. Tom is actually the guy who also wrote the phishing feedback. I would really advise to have a quick look at this blog post, because it describes from A to Z how you can write your own responder, both the JSON config file, the Python file with the code itself, how to walk through the different things, where to position it, where to place it, where to configure it, how to add it into the Hive and Cortex. To be fair, it's been some amazing work that's been done already in the Hive and Cortex, but when you start writing and adapting yourself, you might encounter a few caveats here and there. And this is a pretty nice way of walking through that entirely to be able to explain what you can do and how it can be useful, how you enable them in the Hive, how you adapt them further, and how do you walk through it. Now, I think this is the biggest part of my demo. What else is there to show? So here I have a couple of different other ones. For example, this phishing report, very similar here. Again, we can see the information that came in. I have the different MITRE tech tags. And now this one, for example, I'll just merge it into the other phishing case because it's the same kind of info. You'll see that they now get treated as one case, if you will, but you can see that there's multiple alerts assigned to it, which is pretty nice. So that provides you with visibility, and you get that view, so you know, okay, this is something that we've seen multiple times, and of course it's the same observables. Once you want to then pull out your dashboards, as I mentioned already, you can use observable statistics as well, so you can get dashboards on what is the stuff that we're seeing here, and how well are we doing. I think that's almost it for me. I don't know if you guys have any specific questions already or things that you would want to remark to add. I think the biggest thing that I wanted to mention, the goal of this webcast is just to get everyone a bit informed about what the Hive and Cortex are, how they work together. There's quite some documentation out there already, but from my side, what I see quite often in different organizations that we work with is that there's sometimes, well, even commercial products which are not doing an as good job as that could be done with the Hive. So when you're looking at building this platform, or when you're looking at creating or installing a SOAR platform, have a look at the Hive and Cortex and see to what extent you can actually use it for your benefit, because there's quite some stuff that you can do with it, and it's entirely free. It's a community-driven effort. There's quite some presentations out there. There's one very interesting one from the SANS cybersecurity. I think it was the DFIR Summit, which had a presentation on how the Hive can be used and set up in the organization, but also have a look at all of the different the Hive Cortex workshops by the original developers and authors, because they also zoom in a bit more on the overall architecture, how it can be used, and so on. Next to that, have a look at the blog post that I mentioned on creating your own responders, because using everything that's there already is fine, but there's a lot more that you can achieve by adding your own and by developing additional ones. So I think that's it for me. So I'll open it up for questions if you guys have anything that you would want to ask or address.
Hi, Erik. Thanks for that great presentation. We have a ton of questions waiting for you, so I will jump in and get started. The first one asks, do you recommend use Docker images for the Hive and Cortex, or instead install them manually? The upgrade process is straightforward in both scenarios.
I would always advise to go for Docker, especially these days. So we're actually running everything in Docker as well for the Hive, and it works pretty well. So it's something that they formally support as well. So it's definitely something that I would definitely recommend doing it with Docker containers.
All right, thanks. While assigning tasks in the Hive, is it possible to add some comments for more content to the analyst?
So when you're assigning tasks, well, the idea is you can always add information into the description of your alert, if you will. So that's definitely something you can do, because you can add that information into the case, and you could say, look, this is something specific you want to investigate. So yes, in short, that's definitely possible.
All right, thanks. How do you send deliverables to MISP? I understood the analyzers part, but not how to feed your MISP with IOCs from your cases.
So this is I think relating to how could you integrate MISP with the Hive, right? So let me just open up a screen for that. So MISP in my demo setup, I haven't connected to my system here, but let me just show you very quickly. One sec, I'm opening the right screen. Can you already see my screen? There it is, sorry. I had my slideshow. So if you look into your different analyzers, for example, here, you can see that you have an analyzers which is query multiple MISP instances for events containing an observable. So this is one example of how you can integrate with MISP by querying different information in MISP and getting info from there. The other thing you could do is actually have information and events in MISP being fed into the Hive immediately. So you can actually have even indicators which come into the Hive and which can immediately be checked for relevance into your environment. So there's a couple of ways of doing this. So this is one way, for example, in Cortex, using an analyzer there. There's actually also a pretty big, sorry, excuse my words, a pretty nice blog post about MISP with the Hive integration, which I'll share it here. They have an entire setup on how that can be done.
Thanks. How do you automate ticket creation with the Hive webhooks?
Yeah, so the webhooks can be used. That's one example to create tickets. One of the things that we've done is we've actually integrated with a few other platforms as well. You would typically use webhooks to just use the APIs that are available by your ticketing system. One remark though, in Hive 4, at the moment they're actually relooking reassessing the webhooks. They're going to build them in again, but they're not given the changes that they made in the Hive 3. They're actually looking at how to adapt the webhooks to work well in the Hive version 4. So if you're already moving to version 4, you currently don't have webhooks in there, but it's coming back. But so typically, yes, you would use a responder that typically uses API calls to your ticketing platform that you are using. It does depend on the platform, of course, but for most of them, there's already people who have tried, so that that helps.
All right, thank you. Let's see, from my understanding, every analyzer or responder must have a manual trigger without webhooks. Okay, that was a comment. All right, sorry. Is the mapping on the technique of MITRE framework automated?
Well, the intelligence of the MITRE tech mapping, that actually comes from your alerts which get pulled in, right? So, for example, if you have an alert which comes in, it has that information already. So here, for example, we can see that there's alerts which are coming in with phishing. So you do have that tag which comes in. So it's essentially not automated. It's something that gets pulled into the case, if you will, when it's imported. So that there's not a lot of intelligence going on there. It's just a tag that gets added.
Thanks. Will it support Okta authentication?
Ooh, that's a good question. I would have to. I can Google that for you, but I literally Googled that for you now.
Okay. Do you want me to go on to the next question?
Yeah, that's fine. No, I don't think they support Okta, so I just had a quick look. But
Okay, thanks. Do you recommend create a case automatically from an alert that we know and have a template, or is it better to feed always the alert queue and then manually create a case?
it depends on your use case, because if you have a ton of alerts, so let's say if you have 100 of them which are coming in, you might overflow your analysts when you don't merge them sufficiently well. So that's one of the things that I've seen at some of our the environments that we work on. We actually use the alert queues, and then our analyst starts with the alert queues to actually assign things into cases, which then feed into tasks for the different analysts. But we do have people dedicated to managing the input of the alerts. But that is going to depend on your environment and how you want to do it, of course. So that's actually, it's a good question, and the answer is, unfortunately, it does depend. How we usually do it is we have someone who actually looks at the alerts and who handles case creation, the proper merging, and assigning tasks to the different analysts. So there's one guy who keeps things running, if you will, who coordinates things.
Thanks. Do you use the Hive outside a SOC context?
Well, yes, for the abuse cases that I that I discussed, I've used it a few times for a couple of of weird things. I've actually, to be fair, I've actually used it more for weirder things than than the proper uses, because the guys in our SOC use this continuously for all of their work. I've played around with it quite often for a couple of custom tricks, if you will. But no, the main goal is of course to support a SOC and to make sure that you can automate those tasks. To make sure that you can have those dashboards, have the different playbooks, so to structure the work. So that's very much the use case. Now, if you have another way of using it, then feel free to, but it's not the supported or, well, the defined method, I'll put it that way.
All right, thank you. How difficult is to set up all the integrations we've seen as part of small SEC guys? Are the specs affordable for small-sized, under-budgeted companies?
Well, definitely. I think there it's the nice thing about the Hive is, of course, you don't have commercial licensing, so that helps. And most of the analyzers that I showed now, they're actually all built in. This is, in all transparency, this is not our prime production, the Hive system setup that we're using. This is just the one of the they actually have a training VM that they have available, which is actually, I based my demo on that one as well. So it's a simple setup where you have a whole ton of analyzers already pre-built. So this is definitely something that's very usable and can be very useful for automation in a small organization. The one thing I always remark though with this is that if you're using tools like the Hive, let's say even Elastic, for example, I do a lot with Elastic as well. Never underestimate the total cost of ownership, because you might have to sometimes troubleshoot a bit, get things working the right way. But the idea, of course, of community sharing and making sure that you're doing the right things, that of course makes a lot of sense.
Thanks. How painless is the upgrade from V3 to V4? If we're deploying right now, should we just go straight to V4 to avoid upgrade issues?
But it depends on if you have it currently already running. What they have done is they've been very formal to saying that that they want to make this as flawless as possible. But of course, there's probably going to be a couple of smaller bumps in the road. If you already have it running, they're not going to immediately get rid of version 3.4. That's actually something that they've committed to them very clearly. So I do think if you want to use it now, and if you want to have this as a production version, use version 3.4 for now. Because 4.0 is still, it's a release candidate, but they do mention that they don't recommend using it in production just yet. So yeah, I wouldn't, if you are going to do something in the next 5 or 6 months, then most likely you'll have the Hive 4 maybe in a production version already. But if you want to have something now, then 3.4 will probably suit your needs.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. I think I'm going to move on to the next one. I think you discussed templates. Well, I'll ask it. We are looking to integrate the Hive into our operations. Do you know of any repositories of case templates we can use to get started?
I think there's actually, let me see, I have a link here. We have a few in our internal repository, but let me see, there's actually an, I was just looking. There's a couple of resources here and there, but I'm seeing if there's like a big dump, if you will, of ones. We have a few internally, but I'm just looking. If anyone knows of any, feel free to share them, of course, as well. But I'm looking at the moment, but there's no big repository that I know of at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I observed that you are not utilizing machine tag, triple tag on tags. Would you recommend using that in order to comply with informal standard? Additionally, can custom fields be used in dashboards for seeing aggregated data?
That's actually an interesting question. I would have to look that up. Sorry, that's because the first part was on the use of the tags.
Yes. If you know, I'm going to put it in your questions window right now if you want to take a peek. But if you have to address it, do you have contact information for anyone to reach out? Or maybe you already shared that.
Definitely. If you guys want, I'll put it here as well. I'll just put my email address out here as well. Because if you have very specific questions, I'm more than happy to also redirect you to our guys who are doing most of the actual work. I'm sometimes a bit more the poster boy.